To get this ready for interacting with JavaScript, we're going to be adding some IDs. And we are going to add an ID to the two input boxes for color. And the first one, we're going to set the ID to background color. And the second one, we are going to set the ID to text color. And then for the drop-down lists, our selects, we're going to put IDs in there as well. And this is going to let us target these elements with our JavaScript code. And so for the first one, we are going to change it to font. And for the second one, we're going to add an ID of size. So we've got ID equals font, ID equals size. So now that we've got IDs in the 4 form elements that we are going to access, we're going to save our changes. And then at the bottom, when they click the button, we need this page to activate a function called apply changes. Now this function is going to be in an external JavaScript page. So we're going to go ahead and create that page. And then right away, I'm going to save this as a JavaScript file. And I'm just going to put it right in my Lesson 12 folder. And I'm going to select JavaScript. We're going to have it end with JS. And we are going to call this modify styles. And all we're going to have is the function that this little button is going to call. And the way you key in a function is you have to use the keyword function followed by the name. And the name is apply changes. And all functions require a left and a right parenthesis. It doesn't matter what language you're using. That's pretty much a requirement of any function. And then all functions begin with a opening curly brace, and they end with a closing curly brace. And then in between, you key in the code that you want executed. And so what we want is document.body.style. Okay, and this is going to let us change the CSS styling of our page. And after document.body.style, you do a period, and then you tell it the CSS that you want to change. And if it's just one word CSS, like background, that's all you have to key in. And then we have to tell it where we're going to be getting this background color from. And we are going to be targeting the ID background color. Okay, so we're this little input box, and let me show you what this looks like, because I think it's helpful to see it. In fact, I'll just pull over this page. So this is the input box we're targeting. Okay, so when they pick a color out of here and we hit change, it's going to apply that color to the background. So that's kind of the goal here. So we're targeting this ID. We're going to pull this color, whatever they've selected, and apply it to the background of the page. So the JavaScript code that does that is document.getElement by ID. Okay, and if you see this tip, you should probably click on it because this is case sensitive. And so you'll notice that the word get is lowercase. There's a capital E in element, a capital B in by, a capital I in ID. And if you use the wrong upper and lowercase, it's not going to work. Okay, so we've got document.getElement by ID, and then in parentheses and double quotes, we have to give it the ID that we are targeting. Well, we are targeting this ID. And this is also case sensitive. So if you want to just double click on that and press Control and the letter C, that will allow you to copy it. And then Control and the letter V as in Victor will let you paste. And then because this is a form element, okay, to pull the value from that input tag, we have to add .value onto the end, not node value. Okay, so if VS Code tries to change that on you like it just did on me, make sure you go back and you change it because it just should be .value. The next one that we're going to do is very similar. So I'm going to copy the first part of this. In fact, I'm going to paste it a couple more times. So for number 2 here, we want to change the text color. So the CSS property for that is just color, one word. So we can just put that one word in here. And then this is also going to be using document.getElement by ID. In fact, what we're going to use is very similar to this. So I'm going to copy this and paste it. The difference is the ID is different, right? Because now we're changing the text color. And so we have to target this text color ID. So I'm going to double click on it and copy it. Come over here, double click on background and paste. For the next one. For this one, we want to change font family. Now, in CSS, you would type that in font-family. In JavaScript, you can't use a dash. Sometimes it thinks you're trying to subtract, which is kind of crazy, but that is what it thinks. So instead of a dash, you key in the first word. You do not key in the dash, you just capitalize the first letter of the second word. And you can see it right here. So we've got font, capital F, family. So you get rid of the minus sign and you capitalize the first letter of the next word. Okay, and this is also going to be using getElement by ID. So it's very similar to what we have. We simply need to change the ID. So coming down here, we have an ID of font. So we'll come over here and we'll just change this one to font. And the last one, we are changing the font size. Now in CSS, that would be font-size. And we do have to modify that because this is JavaScript. So it's going to be font, capital S, size. So we get rid of the dash, capitalize the first letter of size. And this one, we are also targeting the ID. So we're going to change font and we're going to change it to size. That is the ID that we are targeting. And we're going to save this. Now, as I mentioned, the button over in interactive needs to call this function. So in the opening button tag, we need to add some code to call the function. And the code we're going to add is onClick equals, and then in double quotes, apply changes. And this is a function, so we have to have the left and right parenthesis. So function names, like everything else in JavaScript, are case sensitive. So if you key in apply changes with a capital C here, you need to do the same thing over here. If you do not make the C capital. JavaScript thinks that you have two different functions, and it's going to tell you that, so if I didn't capitalize this, if I did a lowercase, it thinks that this is completely different than this. Okay, so upper and lowercase make a huge difference in JavaScript, and you just need to make sure that you always match it correctly. So onClick is calling apply changes. It's going to go in and run this function. Now, in order to get all of this to work, there is one more thing you need to do. We've got the IDs. We have our onClick. This is actually called an event handler. The event is clicking the button. The last thing we need to do is connect the modify styles JavaScript file with this HTML page. Kind of like how we link CSS external files into our HTML. If you have a JavaScript external file, you need to link that in too. And the way we do that is we use a script tag. And typically you will put these at the bottom. You can put them at the top as well. It depends on what your code is doing. Okay, so I'm going to key this in. And to be on the safe side, we are going to move it up to the top. So let me put it up here between the closing style and the closing head. The reason for putting it at the top is if your page loads and somebody clicks a button before the JavaScript loads, then you're going to get an error. So sometimes having it down at the bottom, like this, if your page loads quickly and you click on change, this has not been interpreted yet and it errors. So there are times when you do need to have it up top. The way the browsers render your pages is they kind of come through, and when they hit the script, they actually interpret the code, and then they continue on the rest of the page. So it just depends on what you have the script doing, but if it's interacting like this one is with buttons, sometimes you need to have it up top. If it's not interacting with any buttons, it may be better to have it at the bottom. If your script is really long and involved, it can make loading your page take longer because it has to interpret the JavaScript code. It will not take long to interpret this code. This is nothing, okay? It'll interpret it in a second. There are much lengthier JavaScript code that people use, much more involved. That code is typically at the bottom above the closing body. So at this point, we're going to save everything. And then we're going to test this thing. And let's see, I'm going to have to navigate to the correct folder. And if you there are extensions in VS Code that you can use that actually will let you click a button and render it in the browser. I just haven't installed them. All right, so here is my folder. Oh, and the page loaded on my other monitor. And let me change background, hit change, that works. I would suggest changing these one at a time. Then you can isolate any problems. And you'll notice with the size, there is just not a lot of difference between some of the sizes. Normal and small pretty much look the same. Okay, so you can kind of play around with it, but this is how it should work. And if there are any problems, so let's say you change a color and you hit change and it doesn't happen. If you press the F12 key on your keyboard, and if you have a laptop, sometimes you have to press FN while you're pressing F12. If there's an error, you will see it in here, and you have to go into console to see it. Now I'm going to create an error just so you can see what it looks like. So I'm going to purposefully make a typo on the background color. Remember I told you these were case sensitive. So if I do my little typo here and do a lowercase c, and then I come out and I reload my page, and I try to change my background color, it's not going to work. Okay, so anytime you have something like this and you've selected something and it does not work, press F12. Okay, and you'll see cannot read property value of null. Okay, and once you get used to these errors, it is kind of easy to figure them out, but they do give you a little help because they give you a link here. And if you click on that, it actually shows you the line of code that it's having a problem with. And it's kind of got a red squiggle under the issue. Okay, so it's saying it cannot read this value. It says it's null. Okay, so then my next step would be to go back and look in my HTML because I'm thinking, well, it's not null. I've got this lovely light purple in here. So if I go into my code, I can see, oh, I've got background color with a capital C. And here I don't have the capital C. Okay, that's why it's saying that it's null. This does not exist in my HTML. That's why I'm getting an error. Okay, so if I go back and I fix my HTML or I fix my JavaScript, either one, and I make them match and I save it, that error will go away.